Welcome to the Top Business Leaders Podcast. You'll learn how successful people just like you have grown their businesses, expanded their influence, and made money by writing a book. On each episode, you'll learn the inside secrets to help you create a book that can serve as a powerful marketing tool to skyrocket your business. I'm your host, Dan Janal. I help thought leaders, business executives, and entrepreneurs write their books. To find out more and to download our show notes, go to topbusinessleaders.com. Our guest today is Kaihan Krippendorff. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Oh, my pleasure. Delighted to have you here. Let me read your bio. Dr. Kaihan Krippendorff was elected to the Thinkers50 RADAR list as one of the 30 management thinkers to look out for in the coming shortlist as one of the 8 most influential innovation experts in the world. He is a top business strategy, growth, and transformation keynote speaker who helps inspire, motivate, and arm hundreds of thousands of people with the tools and mindset needed to win the future. He began his career as a strategy consultant with McKinsey Company. He is now the founder of the growth strategy firm Outthinker and the Outthinker Strategy Network, a global community of heads of strategy of large corporations including Pfizer, CVS, QVC, Macmillan, BNY Mellon, and Viacom. His work has generated over $2.5 billion in new annual revenue for his clients. Wow, that's quite a background.
Thank you.
Well, it's great to see you in person. I know you were a PR Leads client many, many years ago. And
yes.
Obviously used that PR to launch yourself.
Yes,
to a
it
new
worked.
level of fame,
And I still get, I still follow you and your content and get a lot of value out of what you do.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. You've also written a book. Tell us about the book and how it has helped your career.
Yeah, well, my entire career is built on books that I've written. This is the 5th book that I've written. Book is, I think with each book, my platform grows. And this most recent book is called Driving Innovation from Within. And what I seek to do here is kind of take on the idea that the entrepreneur is the primary innovator in society and show that actually employees working in established companies have really been the innovators. And so, it's helped my practice and my business primarily through speaking. That's primarily how I say monetize my book writing activity.
Great. We'll go more into that in a few minutes. But I want to establish one thing here. A lot of my clients write books intended to be big business cards. Other clients write books to become thought leaders. And I'm guessing you're in the second category.
That is right. I really dig in deep. I find it a topic that I am passionate about, and I spend a good 3 to 5 years researching and writing. I love the process. I love the questions and answering the questions. And as far as my personal brand and what I aspire to, it's thought leadership. My father was still a professor at the same university for 50 years. And I really grew up kind of in that academic environment.
Fantastic. Now, most of my clients would blanch at the idea of spending 3 to 5 months working on a project,
Yes.
let alone 3 to 5
Yes.
years. How do you get I don't even know what the word is, intestinal fortitude or the stick to the pants, or how do you keep something interesting for 3 to 5 years?
Well, I pick something that I'm intrinsically interested in. That could either be kind of intellectually or it could be from a passion. So I discovered many years ago that my purpose in life is people loving what they do. And so this topic of empowering employee innovators, that aligned so well with my passion, with my mission, right? So it was something I had to write because it was my purpose. So I think that's the key, is thinking of and choosing a topic that you care enough about to see it all the way through.
When you say 3 to 5 years, is that a hard deadline that you're working with? Is that are you working with a publisher who says I need to have this book by that time, or do you need 3 years to actually do all the research that you need to do?
I need 3 years to do the research. So I conduct a lot of interviews. For this last book, I interviewed 150 people, and I just get into the content. I don't even talk to a publisher until it's within a year of being complete. Now, it doesn't mean most publishers don't want you to come to them with a complete manuscript. So it's not a complete manuscript, but it is kind of the blocks in the form of stories that are often blogs that I've written. And I can then take those blocks and cement them together after the publisher signs and tells me that they like my outline.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Walk me through your research process. How do you find the 150 people? What do you do if 7 of them say exactly the same things? I mean, who do you, well, let's go with that question first. This happens to me. You interview 7 people, they say the same thing. Do you say, oh my gosh, this is great, I see a trend? Or do you say, oh my gosh, this is the 7th person saying the same thing. I can't quote all 7 people. What do I do? Or is there a third option, or in your case, the 4th option, which is the title of your TED Talk?
Yes, right. Yeah, I think, I guess if you hear 7 people say the same thing, that could either be the truth or it can be a myth. And so sometimes when people say the same thing, because it's just what you say, like there's this term corporate antibodies that I heard over and over again. You come up with an idea inside a corporation and these corporate antibodies emerge to fight it. But that is kind of a sticky concept that, at least in my book and what I believe is not, that it's not true. I think I show that they don't actually exist, but it's sort of a myth. But what I'll do is I'll take these 150 interviews and then I will, in an Excel sheet, I'll write down the names. So you can imagine 150 rows. Mm-hmm. And then after each interview, I write down the key takeaways while they're still fresh in my mind. And then I'll go to those key takeaways and I will plot them in columns. And so one of the columns might be the thing that 7 people said. And I'll have a little X mark. This person said it, that person said it, that person said it, right? And so then you end up with this matrix. And the things that people said often, that's what I'll pull out as potentially a rule or concept or the truth. Right? So for this book, for example, 7 big concepts came out, and those 7 became the chapters of the book.
Did you have an idea when you started writing a book that those 7 principles existed, or did they come to you strictly from your research?
They came from my research.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to go into the writing process not with a hypothesis, but with a question. And then I'll start forming the hypothesis. But I don't trust myself enough to say, in my gut, after interviewing these people, I feel like this is the hypothesis. I like to go through that measuring process that I described using an Excel sheet and really code and see what interviewers said. Sometimes it's a aha. Sometimes it is kind of obvious. And either way, then you got to kind of decide what to do with that. How do you take something that's obvious that everyone already knows, and how do you either represent it in a different way so it feels new, or do you just leave it out because you're not contributing to the knowledge by saying it?
Tell me about a time when you were totally surprised, when you did an interview, you're doing your 130th interview, you think you've done it all, and you're about to say, I really don't need to do any more interviews, and someone just surprised the heck out of you by giving you a stunner that you hadn't thought of. Has that ever happened?
Well, they kind of build on each other, right? Someone will say something, and then someone else will say something, and someone else, and then I'll see the pattern. Like, for example, I went in really thinking that the reason that employee innovators are motivated to innovate was because they wanted for financial gain or career advancement. Because many entrepreneurs, that's what drives us as entrepreneurs, is to build a business. And we might have a purpose behind the business, but I thought that the same motivation. Then I started hearing stories. There's one woman, Heather Davis, who was a client of mine, and she told me the story of an innovation that she created that ended up being a social program that her company launched to help people with autism find work on farms, and through that work kind of improve their lives. They get a driver's license, they have their own money, they get something on their resume, and then hundreds of people have gone through it. And I said, well, is that really an innovation, right? Because it doesn't produce revenue. It's not a new business. But I heard many stories like that. And what the big aha was, these people don't do it for the money often. They do it for the intrinsic motivation. They do it for the passion. They do it for the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big flip for me. And I really had to then shift the tone of the book to be less about driving growth, revenue, profit, dominating, disrupting, to more about changing the world without quitting your job.
Nice. So as you're conducting these interviews, are you writing it all, or are you waiting to see those points solidify, or something in between?
I write it. I write very quickly. And so I'm on the phone, I've got a Word document, and I'm just typing it in as I go. And I borrow a little bit from what I was trained at McKinsey in how you do interviews. You like write the text and the big things, and then you write the key takeaways. So if you and I were doing an interview for 20 minutes, I would just be typing nonstop. I might highlight a few things as I go. And then when we're done for the next 10 minutes, I'll go back and pull out what are the 3 big takeaways, and I'll put those in bullets at the top. And then I'll save that document with the title, Dan on this date, and put it in this folder, right? And I just start filling that folder with Word documents.
I love it. That's a great idea. I sort of do that with these interviews as well. I take notes, and then I send 7 tips or 7 pull-out quotes from the interview, and have my guests look at them to make sure I didn't put words in their mouth or dumb them down or use a word they would never use or whatever, and edit it that way.
I should do that. I don't have that second filter.
Yeah, and as a result, I mean, you're interview number 38, which means I have somewhere in the neighborhood of, 7 times 40 is 200, about 280 or so tips on everything from writing to creativity to editing to dozens of different topics. And so like, there's another book in here somewhere. I'll figure it out.
I like to think of that way as sort of the, I saw this quote from Deepak Chopra, and he had this analogy of, if you don't open the faucet, then no water can go through the pipe. So in order to get it flowing, you need to produce it. So by constantly producing, you are looking for ideas and content, and you get that flow going. So I'm always reading and interviewing and taking notes and writing. Sometimes I don't know what the topic is, but then I start converging on the topic, and then I start focusing the interviews into a theme. So like what you're doing is like an endless source of books.
It is, as are you. How do you decide what to keep in and what to leave out? Because you have so much data, and the publisher would only want so few pages in comparison. What stays, what goes? Well,
I think, and I know others on your podcast have said this. It's that it's not about writing; it's about editing. The first draft, I write something, I know the first draft gets thrown away. It just solidifies my thinking, and then I write the second draft. Now I'm doing that throughout the process. I'm writing a blog, I throw it away, I write another blog, then my editor edits it, and then I look at it again, and then she'll do a little more editing, and then we produce it, and that's a complete piece. So that has already gone from 2,000 words to 700 words, right? So that's the juicy stuff. And when I turn to writing the book, the content I'm working with, now I take those 700-word blogs and I start stacking them up together like a Lego block tower or something. And then I end up with a chapter that is too long. I end up with a 10,000-word chapter, and I need to make it a 5,000-word chapter. There's a different editor that I work with when I'm writing the book, and she is really good at taking the pieces and moving them around, putting them in different orders, creating the connection points, and just hacking out. She calls it the marshmallow, like that. Sometimes a chapter is a marshmallow. It's filled with fluff, and we need to chop out the stuff so that you end up with just the most essential content.
I love it. I'm editing one of my clients' books from a series of blog posts and webinars he's done, and he did a lot of the same material, but in a different order to prove a different point because he was talking about a different subject. And I had to go back and say, he really said it well here, but he said it well there. And that's like move things around because he said it better the second time.
Right,
it's a great mind game where it's difficult to do for yourself because there's so many connection points fighting with each other. Mm-hmm.
Do you find as well when you're going through that process that the person will have, you kind of want to put a conclusion after each piece, mm-hmm. and it ends up being the same conclusion, and so you have the conclusion multiple times in the book?
I'm just reading through. So I'm just reading through what I consider to be the first draft, and I noticed there were 3 similar stories or three things that were the same in essence in 3 different parts of the book. It's like, okay, you have to put them together and condense them because it's
right.
And
just say the conclusion once.
Yes.
Right.
Where does it fit best? That was really the key. Yeah. And it's a mind game. It really is like, it sounded so good on the webinar, but in print, it really flows in a different thought process too, as a convincing tool and persuasion and storytelling. Yes. So it's quite interesting.
Of course, what I did
one person. You have 150 people. I can't imagine. It's like 3-dimensional chess.
It was again. I think I'm going to do this for the next book. Take the 150, and before you write anything, you line them up. You figure out what the 7 points are. Those are the seven chapters. Think of those as like 7 pillars. And what I did for this book that I wish I had done for my prior books, and I'm going to do from now on, is there's one overarching narrative that begins and ends each chapter. So when one chapter ends, it's sort of like, and then Dan, he did this and this, and the question now was, how is he going to get, funding? And the chapter ends. And then you begin the next chapter and says, so Dan knew he needed funding and he tried this and this and this. And then there's the chapter on funding, for example. I don't actually have a chapter on funding, but it's a little bit like the Da Vinci Code book, mm-hmm. which I thought was so brilliantly constructed that, you have these 2 parallel stories. And when one ends on a cliffhanger, the next one begins. And so you can't stop.
Right.
And it just keeps you going. So that has, I think, made the flow of this much more effective. And that was the idea from the editor that I worked with.
That's very clever. I've actually started taking a number of fiction writing courses to help my nonfiction writing. And I subscribe to this service online called Master Classes, where they do have Dan Brown, you mentioned the Da Vinci Code. He has a master class where he talks about how he creates characters and tension. Several other, James Patterson, and several others of that totally top tier genre. People are selling millions of books. Talk about how they do it, and it is brilliant. And business writers can improve their books tremendously by using fiction techniques. And I'm glad that you talked about your cliffhanger technique in books. I can't wait to read them. That's fantastic. We're coming to the end of our interview time. Do you have any other tips for our listeners on how they can start to write their first books?
I think in addition to doing what you're doing is learning the craft of writing, and I'm going to take a look at the master classes. I've seen the advertisements, but haven't done them. I would really think of it as just writing 500 words a day. Just keep doing it every day, and before you know it, you've got the content for a book. Sort of like if you're running a wrong race and you're thinking about the finish line, you're more likely to give up. If you're just thinking about the next mile, you're more likely to get across the finish line.
Great. Wonderful statement. Love it. Kaihan, please tell us who your target client is, how they can get in touch with you. Tell us about your book and your website.
Yeah, so anyone who's interested in strategy and innovation, whether you're a leader that wants to unlock innovation or you're an employee that wants to drive innovation, my website is kaihan.net, KAIHAN.net. There you can get in touch with me and see all my content.
Cool. And the name of your book is?
Driving Innovation from Within, a guide for internal entrepreneurs.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks for listening to Top Business Leaders, the only podcast that shows you exactly how people just like you have built their businesses by writing a book. If you'd like to write your book but don't know where to start, you can find great information at writeyourbookinaflash.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another insightful interview to help you become a top business leader.